All right, so 49ers rookies reported to the facility today to start a week of conditioning ahead of Veteran Report Day, which is at this time next week, July 25th. And then the first training camp practice for the 49ers is next Wednesday, July 26th. And this opens the question for Brock Purdy because this is the one thing that we'll be monitoring most closely as the media, as fans, whoever. This is the one piece of news that's going to be the most watched out of the start of the 49ers training camp. Will Brock Purdy open camp on the physically unable to perform, the PUP list? The list isn't even open right now. The 49ers today designated one of their rookies who showed up at the team facility, Darrell Luter Jr., as PUP, as physically unable to perform, but the list isn't open yet, so they can't put him on until next week. Brock Purdy won't show up until next week, and then the 49ers will decide whether or not to put him on that list. So because this is going to be the biggest question surrounding the 49ers entering camp, well, maybe Nick Bosa and his contract will be big too, but this will be the biggest injury question. I want to spend some time explaining what might happen, what won't happen, and what misinformation there may be out there regarding the PUP list. First off, PUP is not IR. So even if Brock Purdy ends up on the PUP list next week, it is nowhere near as restrictive of a designation as injured reserve. You put somebody on injured reserve before the 53-man cutdown, their season's over. They can't play in 2023. But if you put somebody on PUP, well, that means they can come off the next day. So if Brock Purdy is not 100% when the 49ers open practice next week, it makes complete sense for them to put him on PUP. In fact, I would go as far as to say the 49ers have long expected Brock Purdy to start training camp on PUP because the timeline has long suggested that he wouldn't be 100% until a little bit closer to the regular season. We don't have an update on Brock Purdy. We haven't had one in several weeks. So there's a chance that he's way ahead of schedule. And we could say this: if Brock Purdy doesn't open training camp on PUP, that means he's way ahead of schedule in his recovery. And that would be really good news for the 49ers. So here's how PUP works. Let's get a little bit deeper into this. There are two types of PUP lists. There is the preseason list, which is called the active PUP list. And then there's the regular season list, which won't apply yet next week, and that's called the reserve PUP list. The active PUP list is for players who enter training camp hurt because of an injury last year, an injury during the offseason. For Darrell Luter Jr., if he ends up on the PUP list, he'll be on the active PUP list because of an injury that he suffered with the 49ers at some point between OTAs and the start of training camp. For Brock Purdy, if he starts the season on the active PUP list, it will be because of the injury that he suffered with them during the last NFC Championship game against the Philadelphia Eagles. The active PUP list is very, very flexible. You could be on it one day and off of it the next. So say Brock Purdy enters training camp at 95% health, but not yet cleared the practice. 49ers can toss him onto the PUP list. A week later, he might be at 100%. Doctors can clear him. They can remove him from the PUP list. No harm, no foul. If you're on this list, you still count against the 90-man roster. You could still attend team meetings. You could still throw if you're Brock Purdy. You just can't participate in practice. But there are no real roster benefits as far as roster count goes with being on PUP. The reason that you would put Purdy on PUP is because you would preserve his eligibility for the reserve PUP list. This is the regular season PUP list. Now, the only way that a player can go onto the reserve PUP list when the regular season starts, if they're on the PUP list once the preseason ends. And you can't go onto the PUP list after you've practiced during training camp. So once you have one practice or one game under your belt, it's IR or nothing as far as injury lists go. So the only way that you can be on the PUP list if you're on there before camp starts and you haven't practiced. And then if you're still there at the end of preseason, if there is some kind of delay with Brock Purdy's recovery, or if it's just going according to the original timetable, well, then you could be placed on the reserve PUP list once the regular season begins. And the reserve PUP list, if you are transitioned to it, means that you have to sit out for at least 4 weeks to begin the regular season until you're eligible to be activated to the active roster. The reason that the reserve PUP list is potentially valuable is, well, you don't take up a roster spot once you hit the regular season in the 53-man roster on the reserve PUP list. but you can still come back. Again, PUP is not IR. If somebody is placed on IR before the 53-man roster cut down, they have to sit out the whole season. So, if possible, with injured players, you would like to retain flexibility in the regular season by putting them on the reserve PUP list so that they do not have to miss the whole season. So they only miss 4 games or however many games beyond that, but you have some flexibility. Again, though, the only way to the reserve PUP list in the regular season is through the active PUP list in the preseason. And the 49ers hope that it doesn't get to the reserve PUP list for Brock Purdy. I would think that if they would hope that it doesn't get to a PUP list at all. But when he arrives at the team facility here in a week, they'll evaluate where he is. And if they think he's not 100%, there's no downside in putting him on that PUP list. So you're probably going to hear a lot of misinformation over the course of the next week. You're probably going to, if the 49ers do put Brock Purdy on PUP, I guarantee you people are going to come out with tweets thinking this is some kind of setback. And it wouldn't be a setback. It would actually be something that we'd expect. And if Brock Purdy isn't on PUP, people probably would say, oh, that's just the status quo. And it wouldn't be. If he's not on PUP, that would be actually great news. That'd mean that he's actually ahead of the timeline because you would only not put him on PUP if he's 100% and ready to go. So just know what these injury lists mean. Know that injured reserve is a death sentence to a season at this point, but PUP is not. PUP is something that you do to maintain potential regular season flexibility. So the 49ers will have those options when Brock Purdy does report to camp at some point next week. I'm willing to answer some questions here because I know that this is going to be a hot button issue. So why don't we open this up to a 49ers Q&A? No, there is no IR with a designation to come back until after the 53-man cut down. So you have to make the 53-man roster to go on injured reserve with a return designation. That's 4 weeks. It was 3 weeks during the COVID year in 2020. They increased it to 4 weeks later. It used to be 6 weeks, but now it's up to 4. The IR return designation, though, does not apply when the roster still is at 90 men. So if you put somebody on injured reserve now, it means that their season is over. Obviously, you wouldn't want to do that with Brock Purdy. So that's why you could put him on PUP. If somebody gets hurt during training camp after they've practiced once, you can't put him on PUP. So if they get hurt and you're like, oh boy, it's a season-ending injury, we need a roster spot, that's when you'd put him on IR. But you have to be ready to say farewell to that player for the season. Steve asks, will we know by training camp if Brock Purdy is ready? Will be ready day one, or will Kyle take it slow before Brock Purdy starts? I'm assuming by day one, you're talking about week one. You're talking about September 10th against the Steelers. I don't think that we're going to know for sure. I don't think that the 49ers want to make a decision for something that's still a couple months out before they have to. If Brock Purdy is 100% fully healthy right now, even if he is, they could say, hey, okay, let's get him back to practice. Let's see how he responds to practice, but let's pump the brakes on declaring anything for week one until we're absolutely certain. I think that would be the 49ers' stance. What's Kinlaw's status? Kinlaw's healthy and good to go for training camp. Now, all these players are going to report next Tuesday. It's going to be July 25th. I don't know if they're going to undergo actual physicals, but they'll definitely be examined. They'll report any injuries that may have happened over the course of their time away over the last 6 weeks. And that's when some PUP designations might be made. That's why we got the Darrell Luter Jr. news today, because the rookies reported today for their week of conditioning, and Luter has been designated as PUP, physically unable to perform, but not onto the PUP list because that list won't open up until the beginning of training camp. All right. So I hope that explained the situation with Brock Purdy. And I also answered a question about Javon Kinlaw. I'm getting fact checked by Mike Crocker. Did I say LaDainian Tomlinson? You're saying Marshall Faulk, 1001. Yeah, it was Craig. There's three of all time. You've got Craig, Christian McCaffrey, and you're saying that I said LaDainian Tomlinson instead of Marshall Faulk. I don't remember what I said, but Marshall Faulk is indeed one of the 1,000 guys. I don't know why I said LT. If that's the case, I apologize. Thanks for the fact check. The current state of the secondary is that the depth has to prove itself. And I talked a lot about that in the Darrell Luter Jr. video. He's one of the depth pieces that will be trying to prove themselves. So an injury is a little bit of a setback to that depth. Smash that like button, says Mike. I say it too. Rookies don't hit the field today. They're there for conditioning starting today. So the rookies haven't been exposed for all too long to an NFL weight room yet. You want them to be a little bit closer to up to speed once training camp does start. So that's why the rookies have to show up a week earlier. All right, everybody smash that like button. Everybody hit the sub button. We will all talk to you very soon. Hope that clears up the difference between PUP and, NFI is also different. I didn't talk about that, but PUP and IR. NFI is only for people who get hurt in non-football activities or for rookies who got hurt in college, like Kalia Davis last year. NFI would not be an option for Brock Purdy. Non-football injury list. PUP, physically unable to perform, and it's not the most restrictive list once it comes to training camp. Once it comes to the regular season, you got a few more restrictions, but still nothing close to injured reserve. We'll talk to everybody soon.